Welcome everybody to a tutorial for Aeronautica Imperialis, and here we will be discussing how to play the game, some things people may or may not have missed in the tutorials, essentially how certain things will work. So beginning at the scenario or campaign missions, you will have the chance to deploy fighter planes and jets across a line. Now, immediately on the left and right, you can see each plane with its speed on the left-hand side with an arrow marker and its altitude on the left-hand side. Brilliant thing being, you can actually increase or decrease the altitude, and you can do that across every ship you have. Not ship, plane or jet, so to say. And some of them have a minimum or maximum speed. They're all coming in at 4. But we can start mission with that. And this is a turn-based strategy game for Aeronautica, meaning that all the action happens simultaneously. Now, certain things is you can examine each unit. You can see your speed, but the beautiful thing is it has a minimum and maximum speed. This can be adjusted during the maneuver with the thrust category plus or minus 2. What that essentially means is if I click on this unit and I put him there, I can increase the speed on the left to up to 5 that he started at 3, or I can decrease it. I cannot, I believe, decrease it to 1, because that is about the time that they stall out. Or that was their minimum speed was at 2, so you cannot decrease it below their minimum speed. This is the pilot. And an interesting thing I also wanted to go over real quick is they have various weapons, of course, this being their ammunition for each thing. About 4 shots, 2 shots, 3 shots in the las cannon. But what's being important with that is that they have a range band. Now, this might be a little bit confusing, and to further highlight that, we're going to have to go down here to our weapon arcs. Now that's an A in High Gothic script, B for boundary, and T for tactical top-down view. Might be a little bit confusing initially, but always want to toggle on those weapon arcs. That's going to help you get the maximum bonus or range out of your weapons, whether it's autocannons, las cannons, or missiles, whatever it may be. Now, the way it essentially works out is, this is of course based on the tabletop edition of the game, Aeronautica Imperialis. This is Aeronautica Imperialis Flight Command, but there are a couple holdovers. Essentially, these numbers, L, M, M, S, that's gonna be for each individual weapon, your amount of shots that you can think about it, or amount of dice rolled. You know, it's a little bit of a carryover. So the las cannons are not effective in short range. You cannot use them. However, long range, medium range, you will get one super powerful shot, very likely to damage on a 2-up, with extra damage on a 6-up. And that's essentially, you know, how likely it is to kill somebody. Most jets and fighters will have 2 damage points. Those you can see actually by the orange circles on the orc fighter jets we're going up against. If you click on the orc tab, you can drag and drop each individual plane here to see where your enemies are at, what their speed and altitude is, and predictably you can check, you know, what their maneuvers are going to be. Now, you can't check their weapons, but if you've played any of the scenarios or during the beta, you will know that most of their weapons are most effective in short range. So they're going to want to get in close to your fighters, blow them up, predicting that you avoid them at short range and you hit them hard at medium and long range. So going back over there, again, las cannons, long medium range, they will be effective in this range band visualized as a furthest arc away from you. Medium range will be the medium band, short range being the shortest band. And there's various maneuvers you can make to get into those range bands. For instance, if we take a high G turn, it'll put Gut Cleaver into the medium range band. That'll be most effective for our quad autocannons. But then of course, you gotta think about increasing, decreasing speed will affect which range band they go into. Increasing or decreasing altitude will affect your accuracy attacking them. So you've really got to put things into perspective. Let's cancel that maneuver, and now that we've got a couple ideas on the weapon band, there's one more thing I want to say. A lot of people may not understand what the sustained fire on-off is. That essentially means you will expend more of the ammunition for that weapon, but it will also increase your chances of scoring a hit. It's a high risk, high reward type of maneuver. Typically, you're gonna want to do that on either your weapons that are guaranteed almost to deal some damage, or if you can get, say, an enemy into that medium range band and you have a good feeling they're gonna get into it, you know, put it on the autocannons, maximize about 6 to 12 shots, double that up, and really put the hammer on somebody. Now, one of the other things we can do is toggle the boundary. When you're out of ammo or a mission parameter requires it, you are gonna want to exit the boundary. Now, there's various ways that can do that. Certain scenarios, for instance, will have you exit one boundary. Certain things will have you trying to prevent an enemy. You can see on the tool map there's west, north, east, and south. That's a topographical map as well that will show altitude, terrain features in a roundabout way, and it'll also show the altitude band from 9 to 2, 1 being ground level, 9 being the maximum altitude planes can ascend to. That's a bit of a quick and easy tool for figuring out where you want to be exiting the map. It obviously, if you crash into the ground or another plane, you can blow up and die, so keep that in mind. But that can be a way to guarantee damage, so a decent thing to do. Another thing is on this topographical map, you can also see the positions of planes in relation to where your planes are. Plan accordingly and make your maneuvers. So, this being retribution, there's a couple different maneuvers we can do. Immediately drag and dropping, you can go straight. Brilliant tooltip for this, you can increase or decrease speed the further out you get. As you decrease altitude, your speed will increase in a dive. If you increase altitude, say if we were to increase the throttle of their speed to 5, going up will decrease speed. Inversely, there are trade-offs to each maneuver you want to do. Going straight, turning, will put Skull Cruncher into the long range band. As they are flying in from the west side, they are likely to fly in a straight level flight path or go towards retribution to try to use some of their short range weaponry. If we go further, we could enter into a high G turn. There's one further maneuver being the rolling high G turn, I believe. We might have to increase speed to actually do this. There we go. Yeah, I don't believe you can do a rolling high G turn at low speed, or actually you can. Never mind, don't worry about what I was talking about. Okay, with that being said, we will probably want to engage in a high G turn here, put our weapons onto the sustained fire, and that will likely maximize our damage on Gut Cleaver there. There are other maneuvers I want to show though, however, before we do that. There are power dive maneuvers, and there's typically going to be 3 tooltips for each of your most standard planes, being Thunderbolts and Fidas for the Orc side. Now, power dives, you can only go down. If I were to power dive here, it would be straight up. But a very interesting little tip you can do with this is you can change the direction of your power dive. You can go towards the right and increase speed. And you can very much increase speed, because 6 is the maximum. However, being a dive and that you are drastically lowering altitude, little tip, you can increase the distance gone if you need more ground to cover. And it's typically going to be very difficult. You are guaranteed almost to increase speed by at least 1 doing that maneuver every time. Power dives are only one way, but side slip maneuvers are something you can do 2 directions. Left direction or right direction. And these are typically most helpful when you have a plane you might collide with, or you have an arc that you can very slightly avoid on a plane to your left or right, but you still want to catch them in the tail end of your arc. Very helpful for those, or for doing a very slight maneuver to get out of the way of an obstacle of terrain. You can even side slip while increasing or decreasing altitude. Very helpful maneuver. And lastly, possibly one of the most complex maneuvers is the inverse maneuvers. Now these can be done above or below your plane's position, being a half loop, and you can increase or decrease the distance gone. So you can either fly behind your plane's current position, in front of your plane's current position, or you can do the same inverse maneuvers below your plane. And I believe it's a wing over or a half loop depending on if you're going above or below. Wing over maneuvers will typically gain you speed as you go along and be far longer maneuvers based on the decrease in altitude. Wing over maneuvers can also be placed behind your plane. Obviously, we will not be allowed to execute that maneuver because it would take us into the path of that mountain there, but generally you should get the idea of what you can do or can't do. So that's going through the speed, altitude, maneuver bands. However, we do have one plane with us that has an interesting 4th maneuver band. This is a Imperial Valkyrie, meaning that it will have spiral maneuvers. Now, spiral maneuvers are very similar to the inverse loop, except they are spirals to the side, similar to a side slip, but you can increase or decrease the speed to your free will. And they are very useful for ending. If a plane is tailing you, typically it is more likely that they will blow your plane up. So if you do a spiral maneuver, you end the tailing condition, and that helps out a significant portion. We have plotted maneuvers, or we had plotted maneuvers for retribution. High G turn, sustained fire on the quad autocannon, and let's see if we can take out 1 or 2 planes, knowing what we know. This guy is going to have to go up in altitude, so I believe we can just turn him naturally, go up in altitude, or engage him in a level flight. If I can find out how to It might be easier sometimes to simply start over and drag and drop. But if we predict where he's going to go, or especially if we go for Bone Burner here, they are at a lower altitude, but we can place them in the medium range to long range band of our weapons. We can do that with the auto cannons. And then we have Rainbow Dash, who might be able to blow apart Bone Burner. So let's send him to the right, and that should be able to increase his altitude across the whole width of that medium range band. That will put it in the quad autocannon, and hopefully with these maneuvers you can see how easily you can plot where you want your planes to go, where is a best point of action for your fire bands, what weapon to use, what maneuvers to use, and highlight an example of how you can do all of these things and more, blowing the enemy out of the sky. This plane, we can increase its speed, put Bone Burner at long range. He's likely to cross into the medium range band, flying straight path in the ambush. So we are going to go ahead and put sustained fire on our Skull Strike, since it has the same range band for long and medium range. Whereas if he crosses into medium, we'll get firepower on both the multi-laser and the heavy bolter. We have also increased our speed to 3 beyond the range max of 3 that we have, but since we're descending altitude, we are allowed to do that and go further in the maneuver. All of our planes have gotten their turns ready, so without further ado, let's go ahead and commit to the maneuver and see what carnage we can cause. Okay, so we've killed one plane, as you can see, Eviwaka. Now, in this turn summary, you can see the Orc's flight, you can see the Imperial flight, and you can judge the effectiveness of your maneuvers accordingly. Judging from the Orc fight, the plane is destroyed. There will also be a turn summary on the left. You can judge which maneuvers did what they needed to do. Okay, so the attacks from that Valkyrie missed, so the Skull Strike missiles were ultimately ineffective. My favorite mode, however, is a theater mode. You can use this to pan across. The action and point of view will reset each time, and so that way you can see which planes were able to fire and hit. That plane failed to damage. That plane missed entirely, and that plane was not able to get a plane into its range band. Thank you all very much, and I hope you have learned a thing or two from these tactics.